Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to Arbitrary 20. In this video we're going to be discussing the changes to the Paladin in the 2024 revision of D&D and some of the impacts it might have on old builds that use the Paladin and some potential future builds that are now possible because of these changes. So yeah, getting started with the first change, Lay on Hands is now a bonus action and now no longer affects diseases but can be used on constructs and undead. I don't think either of these changes are going to enable or disable any builds, but they are both really good changes, and now being a bonus action makes it much more useful in combat, and paladins don't get access to healing word either, so I think this is their only way to heal as a bonus action. It's really nice that they have one now so that they can heal as a bonus action and then still do something with their action. Before with the paladin, regardless of what healing option you used, you would always be using your action and thus taking up the majority of your turn. So now paladins will be much better at in-combat healing, which is really nice, and now being able to be used on constructs and undead makes those races like the Warforged a little bit better. And then on to spellcasting, which paladins get at level 1 now, and then the number of prepared spells is a fixed number instead of based on your charisma modifier, I believe, which the number of prepared spells I think is just going to be a similar amount. I don't think it's going to be a huge change. The fact that we get it at level 1 now and multi-classing rounds up instead of down is huge though. I think this matters a little bit more for the ranger than it does for the paladin, because you would want to go to level 6 in paladin anyway for aura of protection, but now some people may actually consider going to 7 levels in paladin to get that subclass aura as well, since you won't get any drawback in terms of multi-classing. But yeah, this is a good change for paladin, but I think it'll matter a lot more for rangers overall, since a lot of builds did actually take just 5 levels of ranger even with that drawback being there. So to those builds, this is just straight up above. And then just like all the other martials, paladin is going to get weapon mastery. We talked about all of these in the last video when we talked about fighter. I'll probably link that video at the end of this video if you'd like to check it out, but we can talk about the weapon masteries that I think will be good with the paladin. I'm still not a huge fan of cleave, especially if you're not like the fighter and you can get access to multiple weapon masteries at the same time. If this is your only one, I'm not sure how often you'll be able to use it. Graze I do still really like, and they do mention it here. If you're using Polar Master, this is going to work great because it gives you more attacks, and the more attacks you're making, not at advantage, the better Graze gets, and Paladin I don't think has a good way to consistently get advantage, so Graze is just going to make those Polar Master builds even better. Nick is somewhat interesting. There hasn't really been very many dual-wielding Paladin builds. We haven't talked about it yet, but Smite is now going to take a bonus action as well. If you're making a build that focuses on burst damage using Smite, getting a weapon mastery that saves your bonus action and still gives you that additional attack might actually be pretty good. And then Topple is probably just the best default weapon mastery on a paladin if you're not specifically building around any of them, just knocking enemies prone and getting advantage on all the rest of your attacks, and potentially giving advantage to some melee allies as well. It's just something you can't really go wrong with. And then on to fighting styles. They're now feats, which again, like we talked about in the fighter, doesn't really make a huge difference. And then they added Blessed Warrior as a default option as well. I think in most cases you'll always want to take a fighting style that corresponds with the weapon you're using, but maybe if you're doing a Warlock multi-class and focusing more on Eldritch Blast, Blessed Warrior could be okay. And then they renamed Divine Smite to Paladin Smite, which gives you the Divine Smite spell, always prepared. So they changed it to a spell. It can now be used with unarmed strikes, and it now requires a bonus action. This is a fairly big nerf to Divine Smite. It guarantees you can only use it once per turn, and now takes up a bonus action. I don't think making it a spell is a huge deal. I don't think anyone's going to counterspell a Divine Smite. I could be wrong, but I don't see that happening very often. I guess there might be situations where you could have used Divine Smite when you weren't able to cast a spell, so maybe there's a few less situations where you can use Divine Smite. It definitely has a lot less Nova potential now, only being able to be used once per turn, which it seemed like in the playtest that was something they were sort of going away from, which in my opinion I think sustained damage builds are a little bit better anyway, but there's still definitely some Nova potential here. We'll have to see how it turns out. The fact that this can be used with unarmed strikes is pretty interesting. You probably won't combine this with the monks since the ability scores would just be way too difficult to get, but if we ever get a fighter subclass that uses unarmed strikes like the brawler we saw in the playtest that didn't make it, if something like that ever pops up in the future, this could be really good with that. And then we have Channel Divinity. This can be used twice per short or long rest, and the Paladin's Divine Sense feature is now part of a Channel Divinity, and I believe in the video they mentioned that Divine Sense is a little bit better and lasts a little bit longer as well. In my experience, Divine Sense wasn't really used a whole lot anyway, so I think that change is probably negligible. But the fact that we get more channel divinities and they refresh on a short rest now is really cool. Before, when you were getting like one channel divinity per day in a multi-class paladin build, it was a little bit difficult to build around it, but maybe building around a channel divinity will be a little bit more doable now. And then the subclass changes: Oath of Devotion, Sacred Weapon, and Holy Nimbus both last 10 minutes instead of 1 minute, and Holy Nimbus can also be used again by spending a level 5 spell slot rather than just being once per long rest. They also have a new feature that replaces Purity of Spirit in the form of Smite of Protection, which grants cover to you and your allies when you use Divine Smite. And then the spells changed as well. They get Shield of Faith and Aid instead of Sanctuary and Lesser Restoration. I'm curious to see what the final version of Aid is, but that seems like 2 okay spells for 2 okay spells. But those all seem to be pretty good changes to the Oath of Devotion. Oath of Glory has its Aura of Alacrity feature improved. Previously it has a 5-foot radius, and now it uses the same as your Aura of Protection, so that'll be 10 feet, and then when you get to, I believe, 18th level, it's 30 feet, so that's pretty cool. And they're saying that this use of just using the same aura as your Aura of Protection is something that they're going to be using a lot, just giving you better synergy between your class features. And then the Oath of Glory Paladin also gets a 1-hour duration on their Peerless Athlete feature, and they get access to a brand new Oath spell as well, which will be cool to see when they reveal it. And now Oath of the Ancients, one of the biggest upgrades is to Undying Sentinel, where the 2014 Ancients Paladin would go to 1 hit point instead of 0. This version now regains a number of hit points equal to 3 times your Paladin level. I think that is a pretty high level feature, so maybe you'll be able to survive a couple more hits before you go down again. And now Nature's Wrath got buffed as well, affecting each creature of your choice within 15 feet. So now that's almost just an entangle spell centered on you. And Elder Champion also got buffed, now requiring a bonus action instead of an action, and can be refreshed with a level 5 spell slot. I think one thing that's here that they mention in the table but not down there is that Aura of Warding now affects specific damage types rather than just spell damage, which I think is actually a nerf. I mean, it depends on the campaign. If you're never going against spellcasters, then this is a buff, but resistance to all spells was, I think, one of the better subclass auras, and now this one just seems okay. To me, this one actually feels even more campaign dependent than the previous one, but I'm really not completely sure. We'll just have to see how it works out. And then lastly, we have the Oath of Vengeance. The Oath of Vengeance also receives an action economy boost with Vow of Enmity, no longer requiring an action, and can be applied when you attack. I believe they did that to Sacred Weapon as well, which is pretty cool, especially since Smite now takes a bonus action as well. They're freeing up some of those bonus actions. It also has an increased range and can be transferred when the current target of your vow is reduced to 0 hit points. That would actually be a pretty cool change to Hunter's Mark if they did it, but I don't know if they did. But Relentless Avenger and Avenging Angel have also had boosts, with the former reducing the target speed to 0, and the latter being able to be refreshed with the level 5 spell slot. So I think the biggest change there is definitely to Vow of Enmity. Being able to just be applied when you attack automatically is really cool, and on top of that you'll have more uses of it as well thanks to the changes of the base class. And then at level 5 we'll get Faithful Steed. We'll always have the Find Steed spell prepared, which you can cast once per long rest without using a spell slot. I really like this change. Find Steed and Find Greater Steed, which I think is now built into the Find Steed spell, always just felt like must prepares because they were so good. So it's really nice just being able to get it for free and not have to use one of your preparations on it. And then we have Abjure Foes. You can use the use of your Channel Divinity to cause a number of creatures equal to your Charisma modifier to become frightened of you. While frightened this way, they can only take limited actions. So it seems like they didn't end up going through with the Dazed condition, which I actually thought was kind of cool. But I do like this feature, sort of consolidating all of the Abjure abilities that were previously in all of the subclasses here. So now this feature just works on all types of enemies instead of the specific types of creatures that the subclasses each had. And then Aura of Courage. If an ally with the Frightened condition enters your aura, it no longer has that effect. I think that's a slight buff to that feature, but it did a similar thing before. And then Radiant Strikes, previously called Improved Divine Smite, now just works with Unarmed Strikes, which again, I don't think that's ever going to combine really well with the Monk, but if we get a fighter subclass that uses Unarmed Strikes, that'll be really cool. And then Restoring Touch at level 14, you spend 5 hit points from your lay on hands to remove the selected conditions. So I wonder, maybe that's not part of the base lay on hands feature anymore. So it seems like it's about the same. You get to remove Poisoned at level 1, and then you get access to removing more conditions at level 14. And then you can remove multiple conditions, I assume at the same time, by spending more hit points, which is pretty cool. I assume Greater Restoration is still going to be a 5th level spell and cost 100 gold worth of diamonds. So being able to spend 5 to 10 hit points of your lay on hands pool instead of you or one of your allies spending that spell slot and 100 gold is pretty good. And then at level 19, just like every other class, you get an epic boon. Do they They do show another one of the epic boons here. I believe they talked about this in the video as well. You can get true sight out to a radius of 60 feet. That is really strong. I think most Paladin builds are still probably going to pick the one that they mentioned in the fighter, where it just lets you turn a miss into a hit for free once every turn, but this one is nice as well. By this level, you might actually know what enemies you're going to be facing at level 20 and which one of these epic boons is going to be more useful to you, or if you're going beyond level 20 and taking multiple epic boons, you might just be able to take both. But either way, I think these epic boons are pretty cool and will enable some good high level builds. But looks like that's it for the changes to Paladin. Let me know what you guys thought of the changes down in the comments below. Last time we went over the changes to the fighter. If you'd like to check that video out, it'll be right here. And next time it looks like we'll be talking about the barbarian, so hope to see you there. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you have an awesome rest of your day, and we'll see you in the next one.